Before anything else, let me tell you exactly what you're about to hear, because this is not a comfortable video. This isn't about cheap motivation or promises of easy money in 2026. This is about that tight feeling in your chest that shows up when you look at your bank account, see some money there, and instead of feeling relief, you feel fear of losing it. Fear of spending it wrong. Fear that something might happen and all of it could disappear. It's strange, but a lot of people live exactly like this. And maybe Yuki Huanavam, maybe today you're not broke, but you also don't feel safe. And maybe that's exactly what's holding you back more than when you had nothing. Because when you have nothing, your brain goes into pure survival mode. You just react. You pay what you can, push the rest forward, deal with today. But when you start to save a little, when you see some money sitting there, something changes inside. A different kind of anxiety shows up. Constante vigilance. You start overthinking every decision. Every expense feels like a potentially irreversible mistake. Every unexpected event feels like a huge threat. And no one talks about this. Everyone just repeats that saving money brings peace. But almost no one warns you that at the beginning, saving money can actually make you even more tense. And if you're thinking right now that this video might just be someone stating the obvious, I ask you not to leave yet, because most people will reach 2026 with more information than ever and still be stuck in the same emotional mistakes as always. They work, get paid, pay bills, try to save a little, blame themselves when they can't, and repeat this cycle month after month. Money comes in and goes out, but the feeling of always being behind never goes away. And the worst part isn't the lack of money itself, it's the mental exhaustion. It's the feeling that you're always trying hard and never truly reaching a stable place. What almost no one understands is that having more money doesn't start with the amount coming in, but with the mental state you live in every day. If you wake up already tense, already worried about bills, already mentally calculating what you can or can't spend, your brain spends the entire day operating at its limit, and a tired brain makes bad decisions. It buys things it doesn't need to relieve stress. It postpones important decisions because it's afraid of making a mistake. It accepts bad conditions because it thinks there's no choice. And that's how, even when income increases a little, financial life remains fragile. There's a very specific point, almost invisible, where this starts to change. It's not when you get rich. It's not when you pay off all your debts. It's when you cross an internal threshold where money stops being a constant threat and becomes just a tool. Before that point, any amount saved feels too small to protect you. After that point, the same amount starts to give you clarity. The problem is that almost everyone tries to get there the wrong way, focusing only on numbers, spreadsheets, and willpower, completely ignoring what's going on inside their own head. And that's why when we talk about having more money in 2026, we can't start by talking about side income, investments, or radical cuts. That comes later. Before that, you need to understand why, up to now, every income increase you've had never truly solved the problem. You earn a bit more, breathe for a few months, and then everything goes back to the same place. Bills adjust to the new amount, expenses quietly grow, and that sense of security that felt so close disappears again. The first big mistake almost everyone makes is thinking the problem is a lack of discipline. You blame yourself for spending too much, for not saving, for not sticking to a plan. But discipline can't survive under constant stress. No one can make good financial decisions when they're emotionally exhausted. Your financial life isn't disorganized because you're weak. It's disorganized because you live reacting to emergencies all the time. And as long as you stay in that mode, any plan will collapse at the first difficulty. Notice how your relationship with money is always defensive. You don't think about growing, you think about not losing. You don't think about moving forward, you think about not messing up. And that leaves you more and more stuck. In 2026, a lot of people will still be exactly like this, just older, more tired, and with an even stronger feeling that time is passing too fast. The question almost no one has the courage to ask is simple and harsh at the same time. What exactly needs to change inside me so that money stops being a constant source of anxiety? The turning point doesn't happen when you learn more about finance. It happens when you change the role money plays in your life. As long as money is just a fragile shield against fear, it will never be enough. It will always feel insufficient. It will always feel like something is missing. Only when money becomes an organizer of your life, a reducer of stress, do you start making better decisions without even noticing. And this has nothing to do with earning a lot. It has to do with creating mental space. When that space doesn't exist, everything becomes a crisis. A flat tire turns into despair. A medical test turns into panic. A late payment turns into guilt and shame, and you get used to living in that state, thinking this is normal, that every adult lives like this. But it's not. It's common, but it's not normal. And it doesn't have to stay that way in 2026. What I want you to understand so far is that the first real step toward having more money doesn't look like a step. It looks like a change in perception. As long as you treat every dollar you save as something that could be lost at any moment, you'll act out of fear. And acting out of fear is expensive. It costs opportunities. It costs better choices. It costs peace of mind. Now, in the second part of this conversation, I want you to think about your real routine. Not the ideal one. The real one. The way money comes in, goes out, and disappears without you noticing. Think about how many times you promised yourself that next month would be different, that you'd be more organized, that more money would be left over. And think about how almost always something happens and breaks that plan. An unexpected expense, accumulated exhaustion, a reward you feel you deserve because you're already at your limit. This pattern doesn't break with more manual control. On the contrary, the more you try to control everything in detail, the more tired you get. And the more tired you are, the worse your decisions become. It's a silent cycle. And money doesn't disappear in big mistakes, but in small choices made on autopilot. That's where a lot of people get lost, thinking the problem is big expenses, when in reality the problem is living without a system that works even when you're tired. Most people believe that organizing their financial life means sitting down, writing everything down, and having the willpower to follow through. But the truth is that willpower runs out. It always does. What really works are simple structures that don't require constant effort. But no one teaches you this, because it gets less attention than talking about flashy investments. Without this foundation, any more advanced strategy turns into sin. In 2026, the people who will manage to have more money won't be the ones who know the most complicated terms, but the ones who manage to stop turning everything into an emotional decision, the ones who automated the basics, the ones who separated money before feeling the urge to spend, the ones who understood that you can't rely on your end-of-day mood to decide your financial future. And here's a truth that hurts a little to hear. As long as you have to think hard not to spend, you're still not truly organized. Real financial organization is when you don't have to fight yourself all the time. It's when the right path becomes the easiest one, not the hardest. Until you get there, every attempt will feel heavy. Maybe now you're starting to realize that having more money isn't about making more effort, but about making less effort in the right place. It's not about cutting out everything that gives you pleasure, but about stopping using money as emotional anesthesia. Because every purchase made to relieve exhaustion or frustration charges invisible interest later in the form of anxiety and fear. If something so far has made sense to you, it's because at some level, you've already felt this weight. And the good news is that this isn't a flaw in you. It's a consequence of living in a system that pressures you all the time and never teaches you to create mental stability. Before talking about financial growth, from here on in the next chapters, I'll show you how this change happens in practice. Without unrealistic promises, without magic formulas, but with a simple logic that completely changes how you deal with money day to day. And when this foundation changes, the next steps stop feeling impossible. Up to this point, you've understood that the problem was never just earning too little or spending wrong. The problem has always been living in a constant state of alert, as if any financial decision could be the one that destroys everything. That state follows you at work, at home, at the grocery store, on your phone, before bed. You never truly rest. And when the mind doesn't rest, it starts looking for quick relief, small pleasures, small rewards, small escapes. And that's when money slips away without making a sound. The third point of this change begins when you realize something simple but hard to accept. Your money today is trying to solve emotional problems it was never meant to solve. It's trying to compensate for frustration, exhaustion, a sense of injustice, comparison with others, fear of the future, and as long as it plays that role, there will never be anything left. Because emotion has no limit. You'll never say, okay, now I've relieved enough. Notice how many financial decisions aren't rational. They're reactions. A bad day at work turns into an expense you don't even remember later. A heavy week turns into food delivery that blows the budget. A tiring month turns into that installment purchase that seems small but follows you for a long time. And the problem isn't spending. The problem is spending to survive emotionally. In 2026, anyone who keeps using money as anesthesia will stay stuck, no matter how much they earn. Because the higher the income, the bigger the emotional spending pattern tends to be. The amount changes, but the pattern is the same. That's why some people earn little and manage to breathe, while others earn well and live on the edge. The difference isn't salary, it's the role money plays in their life. The moment this starts to change is when you decide, even without having everything figured out, that money will no longer be your tranquilizer. It becomes an organizer, a shock absorber, something that absorbs impact instead of being used every time life tightens. This doesn't require a willpower, it requires a structural decision. Here's something almost no one does because it seems too simple. Separating the money of today me from the money of tomorrow me. As long as everything is mixed together, the tired self always wins. Always. At the end of the day, at the end of the month, the tired self makes decisions for your future self. And then you wonder why you never move forward. When you create any kind of automatic separation, even a small one, something changes inside your head. Not because you saved a lot of money, but because you stopped arguing with yourself. You took the decision out of the emotional field. It's no longer should I save or not. It's already saved before you even think about it. And that reduces mental noise in an absurd way. At first, this separation creates discomfort. It feels like you're limiting yourself, like things are tighter. And a lot of people give up right there. But that discomfort isn't a lack of money. It's the brain adapting to not having immediate access to everything. It's the same discomfort as any change that takes you off autopilot. If you get through this phase, something interesting happens. Money starts to stop being the center of your thoughts. And when money leaves the center, you start seeing other things more clearly. The fourth point appears right here, almost without you noticing. You start making financial decisions with less urgency. And urgency is what destroys money the most. Decisions made in a rush almost always costs more. Bad installments, poor agreements, rushed purchases, choices made for convenience instead of logic. When you have a minimum of mental space, you gain something that seems small but changes everything. Chimmy to think. Not hours, not days. Sometimes minutes are enough. The difference between paying on impulse and thinking a bit more, between accepting any condition and looking for another option, between giving up out of fear and realizing there's a way to solve it. This mental space doesn't come when you get rich. It comes when you stop living on the emotional edge. And that happens long before any big amount shows up in your account. That's why some people seem calm even without earning much. It's not because they don't worry. It's because they don't live reacting. Now, think honestly with me. How many bad financial decisions did you make? Not because you wanted to, but because you were too tired to think better. How many times did you accept losing money to gain momentary peace? That's not stupidity. It's exhaustion, and no one talks about how expensive exhaustion is. In 2026, the difference between who will manage to accumulate more money and who will stay in the same place will be exactly here. Those who keep trying to solve everything with effort will burn out. Those who build small structures that work even on bad days will move forward. And these structures aren't complicated spreadsheets. They're simple decisions made once, defining what leaves automatically, defining what never enters the day-to-day account, defining limits that don't depend on your mood. When that happens, you don't become a controlled person. You become a lighter one because money stops demanding attention all the time. Maybe now you're starting to feel something different. Not excitement, but clarity. That feeling of. So that's what it was. Not because someone gave you a magic formula, but because the pieces start fitting together. You start realizing you weren't failing. You were just trying to play an emotionally unfair game. And there's more, because when this foundation solidifies, the next move stops feeling impossible. The idea of financial growth stops being scary, stops feeling distant, because now you're no longer trying to climb while holding everything together with shaking hands. In the next chapters, I'll show you how this mental stability starts turning into real money, without unrealistic promises, but with practical decisions that work in the real life of someone who wakes up early, works hard, and gets home tired. When you finally create this minimum mental space, something curious happens. You start noticing how much of your financial life was built on temporary decisions that became permanent. Installments made just for this month that turned into routine. Occasional help that never stopped existing. Subscriptions you don't even remember why you signed up for. Small financial commitments that piled up not because they were necessary, but because no one ever stopped to review them with a clear head. The fifth point appears right here, not as a heroic decision, but as a silent discomfort. You start feeling uneasy, realizing that a large part of your money is already committed before it even hits your account. It's not just bills, it's expectation, emotional obligation, people counting on you counting on future versions of yourself who will always earn a bit more, work a bit more, figure it out somehow. And that weighs on you more than the amount itself. Because when money is born with a predefined destination, you lose the sense of control. Even earning more, life stays tight. Even paying for important things, you feel like you never truly choose. And the absence of choice is one of the biggest sources of financial frustration. Actually, this moment, many people fall into a classic mistake. They think the solution is to cut everything at once, to do an austerity shock, to become another person overnight. That almost never works because it's not emotionally sustainable. What works is something far less dramatic, but much more effective. Starting to give money back its function of choice, even in small parts. When you consciously decide that a portion of what comes in isn't committed to anything other than giving you room to maneuver, something changes. Even if it's small, even if it doesn't solve everything. This portion isn't to spend, invest, or show off. It's to exist, to create flexibility, to prevent every problem from becoming a crisis. Most people have never experienced this. They live their entire lives with money fully allocated, fully predictable, completely rigid, and that's why any unexpected event becomes a huge emotional shock. It's not the size of the problem that hurts. It's the fact that there's nowhere to pull from without sacrificing something important. When you start building this margin, even slowly, the brain begins to leave constant threat mode. You don't notice it in the first month, maybe not even the second, but at some point, you realize that small problems are no longer stealing your sleep. And that's huge, because sleeping better changes everything. Your patience, your clarity, your ability to say no. This is where the sixth point appears almost invisibly. You start respecting yourself more financially. Not in the sense of feeling superior, but in the sense of stopping putting yourself last all the time. You start realizing that saying yes to everything is a silent form of abandoning yourself, that taking on commitments beyond what you can handle isn't generosity, it's fear of confrontation, fear of seeming selfish, fear of disappointing, and that fear is expensive. It costs money and it costs peace. In 2026, many people will still be broke, not because they earn little, but because they never learned to set clear financial boundaries. They spend their lives putting out other people's fires, sustaining standards that aren't theirs, trying to maintain an image of stability that doesn't exist. When you start creating margin and clarity, saying no becomes less painful. Not because it becomes easy, but because it makes sense. You stop over-explaining. Stop justifying every decision. Because now you understand that protecting your financial foundation isn't a whim. It's a necessity. Without a foundation, any growth plan is an illusion. And there's something important here. Setting boundaries doesn't mean becoming a cold or isolated person. It means stopping solving everything with money. It means learning to help within what doesn't destroy you. It means understanding that saving everyone is impossible, but sinking together doesn't to help anyone. At this point in the journey, many people feel a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief for finally being able to breathe a little. Guilt for not having done this earlier. Guilt for realizing how many decisions were made on autopilot. And here I need to tell you something very clearly. This guilt serves no purpose. It only drains energy. You did what you could with the level of awareness you had. Now you see more, and that's what matters. When you get here, money starts changing roles again. It stops being just a shock absorber and starts becoming a strategic tool. Not in a sophisticated sense, but in a practical one. You start thinking about how money can reduce future effort, how it can buy time, how it can prevent wear and tear, and that prepares the ground for the next step, which is where most people think everything begins, but in reality only works after all this. Increasing income, because increasing income without this base is like pouring water into a leaky bucket. With this Baziani increase, even a small one starts to show, it starts to stay with you. In the next chapters, we'll go exactly into that. how to stop increasing income just to increase your lifestyle, how to keep extra money from disappearing, how to turn growth into real stability, not more disguised anxiety. When you start gaining a bit more mental and financial space, the idea of increasing income changes completely. Before, earning more felt like salvation, something that would fix everything at once. A raise, a side gig, extra money that would finally put your life on track. But now you start realizing that earning more money fixes nothing if it doesn't have a clear destination. On the contrary, it often just accelerates the problem. The seventh point begins when you understand that extra income isn't an emotional solution. It's a tool, and a tool used poorly causes damage. How many times have you earned extra money and it just vanished? Not because you intentionally did something wrong, but because it entered the same current as always. It was absorbed by exhaustion, pending issues, delayed rewards, accumulated needs. In 2026, many people will keep chasing extra income with the feeling that they're always starting from zero. They make a huge effort, sacrifice time, energy, weekends, and at the end of the month, look at their account and feel like nothing changed. This creates a silent frustration because the person starts to think the problem is them. That effort is pointless, that they'll never get anywhere. What changes everything here is a simple decision that requires emotional maturity. Every extra dollar that comes in needs a defined function before it exists. Not after, before. If you wait for the money to hit your account to decide what to do with it, the tired self takes control again. And then extra money becomes just a temporary painkiller. When you define in advance that any raise or extra income will go straight to strengthening the foundation, something interesting happens. You don't feel that immediate pleasure of spending, but you feel something more lasting, progress. And progress calms you down. Progress gives meaning to effort. Even if it's slow, actually at this point, you start realizing you don't need to earn much more to feel a difference. Small increases start to have an effect because now they stay. They're not swallowed by routine. And this completely changes your relationship with work, with opportunities, and even with career choices. You stop accepting anything out of desperation and start evaluating with more clarity. And here's a detail almost no one talks about. When you're no longer desperate, you become more valuable. You negotiate better. You refuse bad offers. You have patience to learn something new without the immediate pressure for return. This doesn't show up in your bank account in the first month, but it shows up in your trajectory. And trajectory is what defines where you'll be in a few years. The eighth point appears when you start feeling something rare. Predictability, not in the sense that nothing will go wrong, but in the sense that you know how to react when something does go wrong. You stop being caught off guard by everything. An unexpected expense doesn't destroy your month. A drop in income doesn't turn into immediate panic. You have plans, even if they're simple. This predictability changes your behavior deeply. You sleep better, you communicate better, you think better. And a brain that works better makes better financial decisions almost without noticing. Not because it got smarter, but because it left threat mode. Up to this point, many people start looking back and realizing how much they lived in tension unnecessarily. Not because there was an easy solution, but because there was never structure. And this realization brings a mix of relief and sadness. Relief for finally understanding. Sadness for having lived so long in the dark. Again, this emotion doesn't need to turn into guilt. It can become fuel to not repeat the cycle. In 2026, having more money won't be about new tricks. It will be about who managed to leave constant reaction mode and enter construction mode, who stopped putting out fires every day and started designing their own path, even with small steps. And the final big movement starts to appear here almost as a natural consequence. You stop treating the future as a distant threat and start treating it as something manageable. You no longer need to imagine catastrophic scenarios all the time. You know that whatever happens, you have margin, clarity, and the ability to adjust. This completely changes the feeling of living. Money stops being a daily burden and becomes quiet support. It doesn't solve all of life's problems, but it prevents them from piling up until they become unbearable. And that's the true wealth few people talk about. Before closing this part, I want to tell you something important. These steps aren't about becoming another person. They're not about turning you into someone obsessed with money. They're about giving you back control, dignity, and peace of mind, so that money stops being the villain of your story and becomes just a well-organized supporting character. If you made it this far, you've already done something many people don't do. You stop to look at your relationship with money without running away, without distracting yourself, without lying to yourself. That alone already puts you on a different path. When you reach this stage, something changes in how you see the next year. 2026 stops being an abstract, distant, almost threatening idea and becomes just a logical continuation of what you're already doing today. There's no longer that fantasy that next year everything changes, nor that fear that nothing ever changes. There's a much more mature and rare feeling, continuity. You start realizing that most people live jumping from one hope to another. A new year, a new plan, a new attempt. Always waiting for an external milestone to start acting differently. But external milestones don't change internal states. And without changing the internal state, every plan becomes just another broken promise. You no longer need dramatic turning points. You don't need grand resolutions. You understand that money grows when chaos shrinks. That clarity is worth more than excitement. That silent consistency builds more than bursts of effort followed by giving up. The ninth movement happens almost without you noticing. You stop talking so much about money and start handling it better. It doesn't become a constant topic. It doesn't become a constant source of internal conflict. It simply exists in a more organized place in your life. And that's liberating, because everything that takes up less mental space gives you back energy for other areas. You start feeling less behind in life. Less comparison. Less sense that everyone is moving forward except you, because now you have your own criteria. You know where you are, where you're going, and why. This doesn't show up on social media, but it shows up in your peace of mind. The 10th point is when you truly understand that stability isn't stagnation. On the contrary, stability is what allows sustainable growth. Before any attempt to grow came with fear, now growth becomes a natural consequence of calmer decisions. You start choosing better where you put your time, your energy, and your money. You stop confusing movement with progress. Working more doesn't mean moving forward more. Earning more doesn't mean being better off. What now defines your evolution is how much your financial life is helping you live better, not how much it's consuming you. In 2026, this makes a brutal difference. While many people will be exhausted, jumping from solution to solution, you'll be adjusting small things, refining processes, strengthening the foundation, not because you're more disciplined, but because you stopped living on the emotional edge. And here comes perhaps the most important part of all. You start trusting yourself more. Not in an arrogant way, but in the sense of knowing you can handle problems without panicking, that you can make mistakes without destroying yourself, that you can adjust course without throwing everything away. That trust changes everything. It changes your posture, your conversations, your choices. At this point, money stops being a measure of personal worth. You no longer define yourself by your account balance. You understand that money is just a resource, not a judgment. And that frees you from a huge load of shame, guilt, and comparison that's followed you for years. When you look ahead now, you don't see a perfect future. You see a possible one. And that's much more powerful. A future where problems still exist, but don't dominate. Where unexpected events happen, but don't paralyze. Where money is no longer the center of your daily anxiety. And that's exactly why having more money in 2026 isn't about magic numbers or memorized steps. It's about going through this internal process that almost no one has the patience to go through. Those who go through it change levels, not of income immediately, but of life. If you apply this in your own way, at your own pace, respecting your reality, you'll notice something few people notice. Money starts working in your favor long before there's a lot left over. It starts protecting you mentally, and that opens doors that were previously invisible. Now, to close all of this the right way, I need to make a clear request of you. If this content helped you organize your thoughts, to feel less alone in this silent struggle with money, leave a like on this video. That shows me this kind of content makes sense to you. Subscribe to the channel, because here we talk about money in a way almost no one does without fantasy. Without gurus, without empty promises, but with clarity and reality. And if you made it this far, comment the word money, just that word G. It's how I'll know you watched until the end and that this message really reached you.